I remember the exact moment I knew my life was about to shatter into a million pieces, and it wasn't when I saw the shoes by the door or heard the muffled voices from the bedroom. It was the smell. That cheap, floral, vanilla-scented candle I had bought at a Target clearance rack 3 years ago because I thought it would make the apartment feel less like a box and more like a home. The one I never burned because I was saving it for a special occasion. It was burning that night, filling the living room with a cloying, desperate sweetness that felt like a lie. I was standing in the doorway of the apartment I had paid for with overtime shifts and sleepless nights, holding a greasy bag of fast food I'd picked up because I was too exhausted to cook, and all I could think was, asterisk she lit the candle for him. Not for me, for him. Asterisk my name is David, and for the last 3 years, I've been the guy who works too hard, loves too quietly, and trusts too deeply. At 42, I thought I had the life I was supposed to have. A stable, if mind-numbing, job in logistics management at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. A modest 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony that faced a brick wall, but hey, it was ours. And a wife, Elena, who I had met when we were both young and broke and stupid in love. We had been married for 17 years, and while the fire had long since dimmed into a warm, comfortable ember, I had convinced myself that was what real love was supposed to feel like. It wasn't fireworks anymore. It was the quiet security of knowing someone would be there when you came home. I never questioned that security. It was the foundation of my entire existence. I built my days around it, my paycheck around it, my dreams around it. And that night, the smell of that cheap vanilla candle was going to burn that foundation to ash. It had been a long week. The kind of week where the fluorescent lights in the warehouse hummed a relentless, headache-inducing drone, and every shipping deadline felt like a personal attack on my soul. I was covering for a coworker who had called in sick, which meant I was pulling double shifts and my body was screaming at me in a language of aching joints and blurry vision. All I wanted was to collapse on the couch, shove some fries in my mouth, and watch mindless television until I passed out. I had texted Alina I was heading home. She had replied with a simple asterisk, okay, see you soon. Asterisk it was curt, even for her, but I didn't think anything of it. She had been tired a lot lately, going to bed early, spending more time on her phone with her back turned to me. I figured she was just stressed, maybe going through some perimenopausal stuff we weren't talking about. I didn't pry. I thought I was being respectful, giving her space. In reality, I was just a coward who didn't want to rock the boat. Our son Mark was 18. He was a good kid for the most part. A little aimless, a little too comfortable living in his childhood bedroom rent-free, but he had a good heart. He had recently gotten his high school diploma and was figuring things out, which in modern parlance meant he was spending his days playing video games and his nights crashing on our couch after hanging out with his friends. He had a key, and he came and went as he pleased. He was a ghost in our apartment, a familiar presence that I had grown so accustomed to I barely saw him anymore. That night, I knew he was out with his buddy, Jeremy. He'd mentioned it at dinner the night before, talking about some new movie they wanted to see. I'd given him $20 for popcorn. He'd given me a half-hearted, thanks, Dad. That was the extent of our relationship these days. I was the provider, the safety net, the guy who signed the permission slips and paid the insurance. I wasn't a confidant or a friend. I was just Dad. I fumbled with my keys, my hands numb from the cold and the fatigue. The lock clicked and the door swung open. The first thing I registered was the music. It wasn't loud, but it was there, a soft, sultry R&B track that I didn't recognize. Elena hated that kind of music. She was a country girl at heart, always had been. This was different. This was a soundtrack for something else, something intimate and deliberate. The second thing I registered was the candle on the coffee table, the cheap one that was supposed to be for special occasions. It was burning low, the wax melting into a shallow pool, the light flickering against the walls. It was a scene, a carefully constructed tableau of romance. My stomach started to churn, a cold, leaden feeling that started in my gut and spread to my chest. I called out, my voice sounding foreign and thin in the quiet apartment. Elena, I'm home. Silence. A heavy, pregnant silence that stretched for an agonizing second before I heard a sharp, muffled thud from the bedroom, followed by a frantic, whispered argument. I couldn't make out the words, but I could make out the tone. Panic, anger, fear, I knew that sound. I had watched enough movies, read enough stories, heard enough rumors from guys at work to know what that sound meant. The fast food bag crinkled in my grip as my hand tightened. I set it down on the floor, a silent, useless gesture, and started walking toward the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped animal. I wasn't moving fast. I felt like I was wading through concrete. Every step felt heavy, impossible. Part of me wanted to turn around, to walk back out the door, to pretend I hadn't seen or heard anything. To go back to the comfortable, blissful ignorance of 5 minutes ago. But my legs wouldn't listen. They kept moving, carrying me towards the inevitable. The door to the master bedroom was cracked open, a sliver of lamplight spilling out onto the hardwood floor. I pushed it open, not with a bang but with a slow, deliberate motion. My brain was still trying to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. The bed was a mess, the covers in disarray. Elena was sitting on the edge of it, her hair a mess, her cheeks flushed. She was wearing a silk robe I had never seen before. It was a deep, crimson red. She was frantically trying to straighten it, her hands trembling. And there, standing by the window, trying to look casual and failing miserably, was my son, Mark. His shirt was untucked and his hair was all over the place. He was barefoot. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was just staring at the floor, his jaw clenched, looking more like a guilty 6-year-old than an 18-year-old man. For a long, horrifying moment, my brain tried to find an alternative explanation. Maybe he had come home early and was just talking to his mom. Maybe they were arguing about something, and he had stormed into the room. Maybe I was just seeing things because I was so tired. I latched onto that hope, that desperate denial, like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice cracking on the second word. It came out weak, pathetic. I was the father, the husband, the provider. I was supposed to be the strong one, the pillar. But in that moment, I felt like a frightened child. Elena started to speak, a jumble of words that didn't make any sense. "David, honey, I know what this looks like. He came to talk to me. I was having a panic attack and he came to help me calm down, that's all. We were just talking." Her voice was too high, too fast. It was the voice of someone who had been caught in a lie and was desperately trying to patch the hole in a sinking ship. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at Mark. I was looking at the guilt that was radiating off him in palpable waves. He couldn't even look at me. He was the embodiment of shame. And then I looked down, and my eyes caught it. The wallet. It was sitting on the nightstand. My wallet, but I had my wallet. I had just used it to buy the food. No, wait. I looked closer. It was mine. The same worn leather, the same stupid Star Wars keychain I'd had for years, a gift from Alina on a Father's Day a long time ago, but it was empty. My credit cards were spread out on the nightstand. They had been rummaging through my wallet. That's when the second, more sickening realization hit me. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to run away. They were looking for cash, for cards to liquidate. They were planning to leave me with nothing. The air left my lungs. The world tilted on its axis, and I had to put my hand on the doorframe to steady myself. The betrayal wasn't just sexual, it was financial. It was a total and complete violation of every single thing I had worked for. My son, who I had raised, fed, clothed, and loved, was standing in my bedroom, with his hands on my wife, and they were stealing from me. They were stripping me of my dignity, my security, my future. The woman I had pledged my life to, who I had held when she cried, who I had supported when her mother was sick, who I had built a life with from nothing, was looking at me with a mixture of pity and fear, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. My gaze shifted to Mark, and for the first time I saw him not as my son, but as a stranger, a man who had just destroyed my life without a second thought. "What the hell is going on?" I asked again, but this time my voice was louder, sharper. It cut through the silence like a knife. Mark flinched. Elena jumped up from the bed, holding the robe closed. "David, please, calm down. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is, you're scaring him." Asterisk, I'm scaring him. Asterisk, I was the one who was scared. I was terrified. I was looking at the two people I loved most in the world, and I didn't recognize either of them. They were strangers wearing the faces of my family, and they had just revealed themselves to be monsters. "Mark," I said, my voice dangerously low, "get out." I pointed a shaking finger toward the door. "Wait in the living room now." He hesitated, his eyes darting to Alina, looking for permission, looking for direction. That look, that silent communication, was the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just a one-time mistake. It was a partnership. They were in this together. They had been in this together for a while. Now, I shouted, the rage finally breaking through the shock. He scrambled out of the room, his bare feet slapping against the floor. The sound was obscenely loud in the silence. I turned back to Alina, the woman I had loved, the woman I had given my entire life to. "How long?" I asked. She started crying. Real, wet, ugly tears. She looked like she was being tortured. "Please, David, sit down, let me explain." "How long?" I repeated, my voice flat, emotionless. I didn't want to sit down, I never wanted to sit down again. "A few months," she whispered, looking at the floor. "It just happened. We didn't plan it. He came to me when he was struggling, he was lonely. I was trying to be a good mother. It was just comfort. It started as comfort." Comfort. She was using a word that evoked warmth, safety, a mother's love. And she was using it to describe an affair with our son. It was the most grotesque, sickening thing I had ever heard. And then she kept talking, pouring out more poison, more justifications. She blamed me. She said I was distant, that I was never home, that I didn't make her feel wanted, that she felt invisible. Mark, apparently, made her feel alive again. He gave her the attention she craved. She flipped the script. The victim of her own selfish, disgusting betrayal was suddenly the perpetrator, the man who had neglected his wife so badly that she had no choice but to find solace in the arms of our own child. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking selfishness of it, stole the words from my mouth. She was rewriting history, painting a picture of a loveless marriage I hadn't known I was in, to justify the unthinkable. And as I stood there, listening to the woman, I thought I knew twist reality into a pretzel to protect herself from the horror of what she had done. I realized that I didn't know her at all. I had married a ghost, a figment of my imagination. The real Alina was this selfish, scheming, calculating creature standing in front of me, crying crocodile tears and trying to make me feel like the monster. I looked at the cards on the nightstand, my cards, my money. "You were going to leave," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You were going to take everything and leave." She didn't deny it. She just cried harder, pulling her robe tighter. We needed a fresh start. We had to get away from this life. "You were suffocating me, David, you were suffocating us." Asterisk us asterisk. There was an us now, an us that didn't include me, an us that was built on the ashes of my life. I walked over to the nightstand and picked up my wallet. I looked at the pile of cards, my credit score, my future, spread out like a deck of cards. I gathered them up, my hands shaking, and shoved them back into the wallet, the empty, hollow wallet that perfectly mirrored how I felt inside. I didn't look at her again. I couldn't. I walked out of the bedroom, past the flickering candle that I was paying for, into the living room where Mark was waiting, sitting on the edge of the couch, his head in his hands. I stopped in front of him. He looked up at me, his eyes red, his face pale. "Get your stuff," I said, my voice hollow. "You're not staying here tonight, I don't care where you go." He opened his mouth to say something, probably to offer another pathetic excuse or a defiant insult, but I cut him off with a look. A look that told him he was dead to me. I didn't want to hear his voice. I didn't want to see his face. I just wanted him gone. He stumbled to his feet and shuffled past me, heading to his old room to grab a backpack. The apartment was silent except for Alina's muffled sobs coming from the bedroom. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the detritus of my life, the furniture we had picked out together, the photos on the wall, the life we had built. And it was all a lie. I walked to the window and looked out at the brick wall, the same wall I had looked at every day for years. It had never looked so cold, so final, so much like a prison. My life had imploded in the span of 10 minutes. And the worst part was, I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the worst was yet to come. The silence after Mark left was worse than the screaming. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that settled over the apartment, smothering every sound except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant, faint wail of a siren somewhere in the city. I stood by that window for what felt like hours, staring at the brick wall, my mind a blank, white noise of shock. I couldn't process what had just happened. My brain kept trying to rewind the tape, to find the frame where I had made a wrong turn, where I had missed the obvious signs, where I could have stopped this from happening. But there was no rewind. There was no do-over. There was only the cold, hard reality of my wife and my son, naked in our bed, planning to drain my bank accounts and vanish into the night. Alina eventually came out of the bedroom. She had changed into a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, as if dressing down would somehow make her seem more relatable, more human. She looked small, fragile, her mascara streaked down her cheeks like black tears. She sat on the opposite end of the couch, as far away from me as she could get, and she started talking again. More excuses, more justifications. She told me about the loneliness she had felt for years, the emotional abandonment, the way I had retreated into my work and my routines and left her to wither on the vine. She told me about Mark, how he had been struggling, how he had come to her for advice and comfort, how one night, after a particularly bad fight with his girlfriend, he had broken down in her arms, and something had just snapped. She made it sound like a tragedy, like a Shakespearean play where everyone was a victim of circumstance. She made herself sound like a martyr who had sacrificed her morals for the sake of connection. And the worst part, the part that made my blood boil beneath the ice in my veins, was that she almost believed it. I could see it in her eyes, the way she was searching my face for understanding, for forgiveness, as if I was supposed to nod my head and say, "Oh, I see. Well, that makes perfect sense. How silly of me to be upset about you having a sexual relationship with our 18-year-old son." She was insane, or she had convinced herself so thoroughly of her own narrative that she had become delusional. She genuinely believed she was the victim. She genuinely believed I was the villain who had driven her into his arms. I sat there, listening to her, and I realized that the woman I had married didn't exist anymore. She had been replaced by this stranger, this imposter who wore Elena's face but had none of her soul. When she finally stopped talking, exhausted by her own performance, I spoke. I asked her the one question that had been burning in my mind since I saw them in that room. "How long were you planning to leave?" She flinched, her eyes dropping to her lap. She started to cry again, but this time it was different. This time it was shame. Genuine, gut-wrenching shame. "A few weeks," she whispered. "We were just waiting for the right time. We were going to go to Florida. He has a friend who lives in a beach town. We were going to stay with him until we got on our feet." Florida, the beach. They were going to run away to a paradise of sun and sand, funded by my credit cards, my savings, my life's work, while I was left behind in this barren apartment, picking up the pieces of a shattered existence. The sheer cruelty of it, the calculated, premeditated nature of their betrayal, was almost worse than the physical act itself. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of cold, hard logic. I stood up from the couch, my legs feeling like they were made of rubber. I walked over to the kitchen counter where I had dropped my keys. I picked them up and looked at them, the familiar weight of them in my hand. "I need you to leave," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I need you to pack a bag and leave, now." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "But where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I have nowhere to go." I almost laughed. I actually felt the hysterical laughter bubble up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "That's not my problem, Elena," I said. "You made your bed, now you get to lie in it, just not in mine." I thought of all the nights she had spent in that bed, the nights she had pushed me away, the nights she had told me she was tired, the nights she had turned her back to me. And all along, she was imagining him. All along, she was lying there, wrapped in her own thoughts, dreaming of the boy she had raised. It was grotesque. It was obscene, and I couldn't stand to look at her for another second. She didn't argue. She just nodded, a defeated, broken gesture, and shuffled back to the bedroom to pack. I heard her open the closet, heard the sound of hangers scraping against the rod, heard the soft rustle of clothes being thrown into a bag. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cool night air rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt. I stood there, holding the door open, waiting. She came out a few minutes later, dragging a cheap duffel bag behind her. She paused in front of me, her eyes meeting mine one last time. She opened her mouth as if she was going to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a final plea, but she must have seen something in my expression that stopped her. She just closed her mouth and walked past me, out into the hallway. I watched her walk to the elevator, her shoulders hunched, her head down. She looked pathetic. She looked old. She looked nothing like the vibrant, beautiful woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The elevator doors slid open, she stepped inside and she was gone. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my eyes squeezed shut. The tears came then, hot and violent and completely unstoppable. I cried for the first time in years. I cried for my marriage, for my son, for the life I had believed in, for the future I had worked so hard to build. I cried because I was alone, not just in the apartment but in the world. The two people I had trusted most had stabbed me in the back, and I had no idea how to go forward. I eventually stumbled to the couch and collapsed, the sobs racking my body until I was completely empty, a hollow shell of the man I had been just hours before. The next few days were a blur of pain and logistics. I took a leave of absence from work, unable to face the fluorescent lights and the pitying stares of my coworkers. I spent most of my time in a daze, moving through the motions of survival. I ate when I remembered to. I slept in fits and starts, always waking up with a jolt, my heart pounding, the nightmare of that night replaying on a loop in my head. I changed the locks on the apartment. I called the credit card companies and put a freeze on all my accounts. I canceled the joint bank account we had shared for 17 years and opened a new one in my name only. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Everything in the apartment reminded me of them. The kitchen table where Mark used to do his homework. The worn spot on the couch where Elena always sat. The stupid, cheap vanilla candle that was still sitting on the coffee table, a symbol of the night my world ended. I couldn't bear to look at it, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away either. It felt like the only tangible proof that what had happened was real, that I hadn't just hallucinated the entire thing. Mark called me twice. The first call was a day after he left. I let it go to voicemail. He left a rambling, tearful message, apologizing, saying he never meant to hurt me, that he was confused, that he loved me. It sounded rehearsed, like he was reading from a script that Alina had fed him. I deleted it. The second call came 3 days later. This time he was angry. He accused me of being a bad father, of abandoning him, of being the reason their affair had started in the first place. He said I was never there, that I never listened, that I had pushed him away emotionally his entire life. He said Alina was the only person who ever truly understood him. He told me that I was dead to him, and then he hung up. I sat there, holding the phone in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. I was completely numb. Alina didn't call. She texted me once, a long, rambling message that was half apology, half accusation. She said she was staying with her sister, Lisa, for a while. She said she was sorry for the pain she had caused, but she needed to find herself. She said she still loved me, but she was in love with Mark. She said it was the most confusing, horrible thing she had ever gone through, and she didn't know what she was going to do. I read the text 3 times, my eyes burning a hole through the screen, and then I deleted it. I blocked her number. I blocked Mark's. I didn't want to hear from them ever again. I wanted to erase them from my memory, to perform a lobotomy on my own brain and cut out the part that remembered them. My sister, Rachel, came to visit me after I told her what happened. She was the only family I had left. She lived in a suburb about an hour away, and she had driven down the moment I called her. She was a no-nonsense woman, a high school principal who had seen every kind of broken person walk through her doors. She didn't coddle me. She walked into the apartment, looked at my haggard face, looked at the state of the living room and said, "Jesus Christ, Dave, you look like shit." Then she hugged me. She hugged me so tight I felt my ribs creak, and she didn't let go until she felt me relax. She made me shower. She made me eat a real meal. She sat with me on the couch, her hand on my arm, and she let me talk. I told her everything, the whole sordid, disgusting story. I didn't hold anything back. I told her about the smells, the sounds, the look on Mark's face, the look on Alina's face, the credit cards spread out on the nightstand. I told her about the weeks of planning, the Florida beach town, the fresh start they were going to have on my dime. I told her how I had been replaced by my own son. Rachel listened without interrupting. Her face remained stoic, but I could see the fury burning in her eyes. When I finished, she took a deep breath and blew it out slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to get a lawyer. You need to file for divorce before she does. You need to protect your assets, the house, your retirement. You need to make sure that son of a bitch doesn't get a cent of your money. He's a parasite and you need to cut him off." I nodded, the word lawyer sending a chill down my spine. It was so final. It was the end of everything. "Second," she continued, "you're going to change your phone number. You're going to change your email. You're going to make yourself a fortress. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them a single damn word. You owe yourself the chance to survive this. And third," she said, her voice softening, "you're going to let me be here for you. You're not going to shut down and push me away like you did when Mom died. You're going to let me help you. Got it, I nodded again, a lump forming in my throat. I had spent so long being the strong one, the provider, the rock. I had forgotten what it felt like to lean on someone else. I had forgotten what it felt like to be taken care of. Rachel was a force of nature, a hurricane of practicality and love, and in that moment I was grateful for her. I was grateful for anyone who wasn't Elena or Mark. She stayed with me for a week. She helped me sort through the paperwork, make phone calls, and clean out the apartment. We boxed up all of Elena's things and put them in the corner of the spare room. We boxed up Mark's things and put them in the trash. I didn't want to see their faces. I didn't want to smell their scent. I wanted to exorcise them from my home. I hired a divorce lawyer named Harold Feynman. He was a shark, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and a silver tongue. I told him everything and he listened without flinching. He didn't judge me. He didn't pity me. He just asked questions and took notes. Adultery is grounds for divorce in this state, he said, tapping his pen against his notepad. But the real issue here is the financial betrayal. The planning, the attempted theft. That's going to work in our favor. She's in a weaker position. She walked out on you. She abandoned the marital home. She's currently living with her sister. We can argue that she has demonstrated a clear intent to defraud you of marital assets. We have a strong case. We're going to bleed her dry in the settlement. I felt a perverse sense of satisfaction at his words. I had spent my life being a nice guy, a generous guy, a doormat. It was time to be selfish. It was time to fight. The court date was set for 2 months out. In the meantime, I tried to find some semblance of normalcy. I went back to work, but I was a ghost there too. I went through the motions, checking shipping manifests and signing off on orders, but my mind was always elsewhere. I thought about Elena constantly, but not with love. With a cold, simmering hatred that was new and terrifying. I thought about Mark too, but with a different kind of anger. An anger that was tinged with sorrow. He was my son. I had raised him. I had changed his diapers, taught him how to ride a bike, stayed up all night when he had a fever, paid for his school supplies, his clothes, his phone, his video games. And this was how he repaid me. By stealing my wife and my money and my sense of self. He had destroyed not just my marriage, but my identity as a father. I didn't know how to be a father to a monster. I didn't know if I ever could be again. I started drinking more than I should. It wasn't an all-day, stumbling around drunk kind of thing. It was a quiet, solitary drinking. A few glasses of whiskey after work, to take the edge off the pain, to dull the sharp edges of my thoughts. Rachel warned me about it, but I waved her off. I'm fine, I told her. I just need to unwind. She gave me a skeptical look but didn't push. She knew me well enough to know that I had to hit rock bottom before I would change. She didn't know that I was already there. One night I was scrolling through my phone, a habit I had developed to distract myself from the silence of the apartment. I opened Instagram, a platform I rarely used, and my thumb hovered over the search bar. Against my better judgment, I typed in Mark's name. His profile was public. I scrolled through his photos, my heart pounding in my chest. There were pictures of him with his friends, pictures of him at parties, pictures of him looking happy and carefree. And then I saw it, a photo of him and Elena. They were at a restaurant, a place I had never been to. Elena was wearing a low-cut top, her hair done up, her makeup flawless. She was smiling. A real smile, not the tight, strained smile she had worn for me in the last few years. Mark had his arm around her and he was kissing her cheek. The caption was a single heart emoji. The date was from 2 weeks ago, just a few days after I had kicked her out. They were already posting photos together. They were already flaunting their relationship, their sick, disgusting affair to the world. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I closed the app and threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of lines. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything anymore. I sat in the dark, staring at the broken phone on the floor, and I realized that I wasn't just angry. I wasn't just hurt. I was broken. Completely, irrevocably broken. The man I had been, the confident, hard-working, trusting man, was dead. He had died in that bedroom the moment I saw those credit cards on the nightstand. In his place was a bitter, angry, hollow shell. A man who couldn't trust anyone, who didn't believe in love, who was filled with so much rage that he could barely contain it. And the worst part, the part that truly terrified me, was that I was starting to understand Mark. I was starting to understand how a person could hurt someone so badly. I was starting to understand the darkness that lived inside people. and I was starting to feel that darkness take root in my own soul. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them destroy me completely, but I had no idea how to stop it. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare. Elena's lawyer, a smarmy, aggressive woman named Patricia Vance, tried to paint me as the villain. She argued that I was an absent, emotionally neglectful husband who had driven his wife into the arms of another man. She conveniently ignored the fact that the other man was our 18-year-old son. She tried to argue that Mark was a vulnerable adult who had been manipulated by a confused and lonely woman. It was absurd. It was an insult to my intelligence. And yet, it was working. The judge, a tired-looking man named Judge Miller, listened to all of it with a weary expression. He didn't seem to care about the specifics. He just wanted to get through the case and move on to the next one. He awarded Elena a significant amount of spousal support, citing her years of dependency on my income. He gave her half of my retirement savings. He gave her the car. I fought back, screaming at my lawyer, demanding that we appeal, demanding that we fight, but Feynman just shook his head. "It's over, David," he said. "The judge has made his ruling. It's time to move on." I left the courtroom feeling like I had been gutted. I had lost the house, I had lost the car, I had lost my retirement, I had lost everything. They had taken it all. But they hadn't taken my job, they hadn't taken my ability to work, and they hadn't taken my will to survive. I went back to the apartment that was now mine alone, and I started making plans. I was going to work harder than ever. I was going to rebuild my life from the ground up. I was going to make so much money that Elena's settlement would feel like pocket change. I was going to thrive. I was going to show them that they hadn't broken me. It was a promise I made to myself in the dark, empty silence of that apartment, and it was a promise I intended to keep. But first, I had to find a way to get rid of the ghost of the man I used to be, and the only way to do that was to become someone new. Someone harder. Someone who could never be hurt again. The months that followed the divorce were a study in survival, a brutal, mechanical process of putting one foot in front of the other while the rest of me remained frozen in that bedroom, staring at the credit cards on the nightstand. I threw myself into work with a fervor that bordered on mania. I took on every extra shift, every last-minute project, every opportunity to prove that I was indispensable. I became the guy who never said no, who showed up early and left late, who lived on coffee and spite. The warehouse became my sanctuary, a place where the noise of the conveyor belts and the hum of the forklifts drowned out the screaming in my head. My coworkers noticed the change. They made comments about how focused I was, how driven. They didn't know that I wasn't driven by ambition. I was driven by a cold, consuming rage that had calcified into something I could almost hold in my hands. I was running from the pain, and I was running fast. But you can't outrun a ghost. Elena and Mark were everywhere. Not physically, thank God, but in the echoes of my life. I would see a couple holding hands in a grocery store, and my stomach would turn. I would hear a mother and son laughing together, and I would have to leave the room. The world had become a minefield of triggers, and every single one of them sent me spiraling back to that night. I started sleeping less. The nightmares were relentless. I would dream of Mark's face, twisted into a snarl of betrayal, and I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the sheets tangled around my legs. I stopped answering my phone unless it was work-related. I stopped going out with friends. I stopped living. I was a walking corpse, going through the motions of life while my soul rotted away inside. Rachel continued to check on me, but even she couldn't break through the wall I had built around myself. She would call, and I would let it go to voicemail. She would text, and I would reply with one-word answers. She came to the apartment a few times, bringing groceries and that look of pity I had come to despise. I appreciated her effort, I really did, but I couldn't stand to see that look in her eyes. It was a reminder of what I had lost, of who I used to be. I had been a man who made people proud, a man who was respected, a man who was whole. Now I was just a cautionary tale, a broken piece of furniture that everyone was too polite to throw away. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to disappear into the background noise of the world and never be seen again. The one thing that kept me from completely unraveling was my work. It was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that followed a predictable pattern. I would clock in, do my job, and clock out. No surprises, no betrayal, no feelings. I was a machine, efficient and emotionless. And then one day, my boss, a gruff man named Gary who had been in the logistics game for 40 years, called me into his office. He looked at me with those shrewd, knowing eyes and told me that the company was expanding. They were opening a new distribution center in a different state, and they wanted me to run it. It was a promotion, a significant one, more money, more responsibility, a fresh start. He didn't ask me about my personal life. He didn't ask me how I was doing. He just laid the offer on the table and waited for my answer. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said, I'll take it. It was the easiest decision I had ever made. I had nothing keeping me here. The apartment was just a box of memories that suffocated me every time I walked through the door. The city was a graveyard of the life I used to have. I needed to get out. I needed to become someone new, someone who didn't have a past, someone who had never been married to Alina, someone who had never raised Mark. I needed to shed my skin and start over as a different person entirely. Within a month, I had packed up everything I owned, which wasn't much, and loaded it into a rental truck. I sold the apartment, the last physical tie to my old life, and I drove away. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. The past was a dead weight, and I was determined to leave it in the rearview mirror. The new city was a sprawling, anonymous metropolis on the other side of the country. It was hot and loud and full of people who didn't know me, didn't care about me, and had no idea what I had been through. It was perfect. I found a small, utilitarian apartment in a nondescript building on the edge of town. It was bare and cold and had no memories attached to it. I furnished it with the bare essentials: a bed, a table, a chair, a lamp. I didn't want comfort. Comfort was a luxury I couldn't afford. It reminded me of the life I had lost, the softness I had allowed myself to enjoy. I was done with softness. I was done with vulnerability. I was done with feeling. The new job was everything I needed it to be. It was challenging, demanding, and all-consuming. I threw myself into the work of setting up the new distribution center, hiring staff, implementing systems, troubleshooting problems. I worked 12, 14, 16-hour days. I didn't take breaks. I didn't take vacations. I didn't take sick days. I was the first one in and the last one out, and my new employees learned quickly that I was not a man to be trifled with. I was strict, demanding, and unforgiving. I didn't tolerate mistakes. I didn't tolerate excuses. I didn't tolerate anything that resembled the weakness I had once shown in my personal life. I was respected, maybe even feared, but I wasn't liked. And I didn't care. I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to survive. The loneliness was a constant companion, but I had learned to make peace with it. I had become a creature of habit, a solitary figure who spent his evenings in his barren apartment, eating takeout in front of the television, the sound of the news providing a hollow backdrop to my thoughts. I didn't date. I didn't even look at other women. The thought of intimacy, of opening myself up to someone again, made me feel physically ill. I had trusted once, and it had destroyed me. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I had built a fortress around my heart, and I had thrown away the key. I was safe. I was untouchable. I was alone. It was on a Friday night, about a year into my new life, that everything shifted. I was working late, as usual, going over inventory reports that I had already memorized, when I heard a knock on my office door. I looked up, annoyed. It was after 7. Everyone should have been gone. The door opened and a woman stepped in. Her name was Sarah, and she was one of the new hires, a recent college graduate who had been working in the administrative department for about 3 months. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that had a habit of lingering on me a little too long. I had noticed her, of course. I wasn't blind, but I had deliberately kept my distance. I didn't want to get involved with anyone. I didn't want the complications. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice hesitant. "I'm sorry to bother you. I noticed your light was on and I wanted to ask you something." I nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. She perched on the edge of the chair across from my desk, looking nervous. She asked me a question about a procedural issue, something I could have answered in my sleep. I explained it to her, my voice flat and professional, my eyes fixed on the papers in front of me. She thanked me and stood up to leave, but she paused at the door. She turned back to look at me, her expression soft, almost tender. "You work too hard, Mr. Miller," she said. "You should take a break sometime, live a little." I stared at her, my jaw tight. "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you for your concern." She gave me a small smile and left, closing the door behind her. I sat there in the silence of my office, her words echoing in my head. Asterisk live a little. Asterisk I didn't know how to do that anymore. I had forgotten what it felt like to let go, to have fun, to feel something other than anger or numbness. I thought about Sarah's face, the kindness in her eyes, and I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a dangerous feeling, a feeling that threatened to crack the fortress I had built. I pushed it down, hard. I couldn't afford to be weak. I couldn't afford to trust again. Trust was a luxury I had learned to live without, but the seed had been planted and it was already starting to grow. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Sarah more and more. I saw her laughing with her coworkers in the break room. I saw her helping a struggling employee with a difficult task. I saw her working late, just like me, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was kind, competent, and genuinely good. She was everything Alina hadn't been, and that scared me more than anything. I started avoiding her, taking different routes through the office, making excuses to leave meetings early. I couldn't let myself get attached. It was too dangerous. The risk was too great. But the more I tried to push her away, the more she seemed to appear in my periphery, a constant reminder of the life I had denied myself. It was another late night, a month later, when she found me again. I was in the break room, staring blankly at the vending machine, not really seeing the snacks inside. I heard her footsteps behind me and I knew it was her. I could feel her presence, a warm, gentle energy that cut through the coldness I had wrapped around myself. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "you're always here. Don't you have a home to go to?" I turned to look at her, my expression unreadable. "My work is my home," I said. It sounded more bitter than I intended. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me with those intelligent eyes, and I saw something in them that I hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. Not pity, not judgment, just understanding. "It must be lonely," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I opened my mouth to deny it, to deflect, to push her away. But the words wouldn't come. I just stood there, frozen, my carefully constructed walls crumbling around me. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. It was a simple gesture, a gesture of comfort, but it felt like a lightning bolt. I flinched, pulling away. "Don't," I said, my voice harsh. "You don't know me, you don't know what I've been through." She didn't retreat. She just stood there, her hand still outstretched, a patient look on her face. "You're right," she said. "I don't know you, but I'd like to if you'd let me." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. I was terrified. The thought of letting someone in, of being vulnerable again, was the most frightening thing I could imagine. But there was something about her, something that reminded me of the person I used to be. The person who believed in love, who trusted people, who wasn't afraid to feel. It was a faint memory, a ghost of a life I had lived long ago. But it was there, buried deep beneath the layers of pain and anger. And for the first time in over a year, I felt a glimmer of hope. I didn't say yes. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and walked out of the break room, leaving her standing there. But I didn't go back to my office. I went home. And for the first time in months, I sat in my apartment and I thought about the future. I thought about the possibility of something more than just survival. It was a dangerous thought, a reckless thought, but I couldn't shake it. Sarah had cracked my armor, and I didn't know if I could repair it. The next day, I made a conscious effort to avoid her again. I threw myself into my work with even more intensity, trying to drown out the thoughts that had started to plague me. But she was a persistent presence in the back of my mind. I would catch myself looking for her in the hallways, listening for the sound of her voice. It was maddening. I had spent so long building walls around my heart, and she was dismantling them brick by brick. I didn't know if I was ready to let her in. I didn't know if I would ever be ready. But something had changed. The numbness was gone. The anger was fading, and in its place was a deep, aching loneliness that I had been ignoring for far too long. One evening, I was sitting at my desk, staring at the same report I had been staring at for 3 hours when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. The message was simple, just 5 words. "I'm sorry, I miss you." I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I knew that number. It was Alina's number. I had blocked it, but she had gotten a new one. I felt the familiar rush of anger and pain, the old wounds tearing open. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to call her and tell her exactly what I thought of her and her pathetic apology. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, the phone clutched in my hand. And then, a new message appeared. I made a mistake. I was confused. I never stopped loving you. Can we talk? I read the words and I felt something inside me shift. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but something else. A dark, twisted satisfaction. She was reaching out to me. She was admitting she had made a mistake. She was asking for my forgiveness. And I realized in that moment that I held all the power. She had taken everything from me, but now she was the one who was hurting. She was the one who was desperate. She was the one who had lost. I could ignore her. I could hurt her like she had hurt me. I could make her suffer, but I didn't. Instead, I did something I hadn't expected. I looked at the message and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no longing, just emptiness. She had been my world, the center of my universe. And now she was just a stranger, a ghost from a life I no longer recognized. I deleted the message. I deleted the conversation, and I blocked the new number. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear her voice. I didn't want anything to do with her ever again. She had made her choice and she had to live with the consequences. I was done being a victim. I was done letting her control my emotions. I was moving on with or without her. I looked up from my phone and my eyes landed on a photo on my desk. It was a picture of me and Sarah, taken at a team-building event a few weeks ago. We were standing next to each other, smiling. It was a forced smile on my part, but it was a smile nonetheless. I looked at Sarah's face, her bright eyes, her warm smile, and I made a decision. I was going to let myself feel again. I was going to take a chance. I was going to live a little. I picked up my phone and typed out a message to Sarah. Are you free for dinner this weekend? I hit send before I could change my mind. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Her reply was a single word. Yes. It was the most terrifying and exhilarating word I had ever received. I spent the next few days in a state of nervous anticipation. I hadn't been on a date in over a decade, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I was determined to do it. I had to prove to myself that I wasn't broken, that I could still feel, that I could still connect with another human being. Sarah was the perfect person to take that chance with. She was kind, patient, and she didn't seem to care about the baggage I was carrying. She saw past the armor and the walls and the bitterness. She saw the man I used to be, and for the first time in a long time, I wanted to be that man again. The day of the date arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I spent an hour getting ready, trying on 3 different shirts, shaving twice, obsessing over every detail. I was acting like a teenager going on his first date, and it was both ridiculous and wonderful. I met her at a small Italian restaurant downtown, a cozy place with candlelit tables and the smell of garlic and herbs in the air. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table in the corner, a glass of wine in front of her. She smiled when she saw me, and it was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. I walked over to her, my heart pounding in my chest, and I sat down across from her. "Hi," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Hi," she replied. And in that moment, I knew that everything was going to be okay. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a very long time, I was excited to find out. The date with Sarah was the first real step I had taken toward becoming human again. It wasn't a grand, sweeping romance. It was quiet and tentative, 2 people cautiously circling each other, testing the waters. We talked for hours that night about everything and nothing. She told me about her childhood in a small Midwestern town, her dreams of becoming a graphic designer, her complicated relationship with her overbearing mother. I told her about the warehouse, about my love for order and efficiency, about my sister Rachel, and the way she had held me together when I was falling apart. I didn't tell her about Alina and Mark. Not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, too raw. I wasn't ready to lay that ugliness at her feet, but she didn't push. She didn't pry. She just listened, her eyes fixed on mine, her presence a warm, steady anchor in the chaos of my emotions. When the waiter brought the check, I felt a pang of disappointment. I didn't want the night to end. I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment, to the silence and the loneliness that had become my only companions. I walked her to her car, a modest sedan parked a few blocks away, and we stood there on the sidewalk, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. She looked up at me, her face illuminated by the glow of a street lamp, and she smiled. "Thank you for tonight, David," she said. "I had a really nice time." I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too," I said. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, gentle kiss, nothing like the desperate, hungry kisses I had shared with Alina in the early days of our marriage. It was something new, something fragile, something that felt like a beginning. She pulled back, her eyes searching mine. "I'll see you soon?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "Very soon." I watched her drive away, and I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, a smile on my face that I couldn't quite wipe off. It was the first time I had smiled in over a year, and it felt strange and unfamiliar. But it also felt right. Over the next few months, Sarah and I became inseparable. We spent every free moment together, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, watching bad movies on her couch. She was patient with me, understanding my need for space, my occasional bouts of silence, my reluctance to talk about my past. She never pushed me, never demanded more than I was ready to give. She just waited, a constant, reassuring presence at my side. And slowly, inexorably, I started to heal. The nightmares became less frequent. The flashbacks became less intense. The anger that had simmered in my veins for so long began to cool, replaced by something softer, something warmer. I was starting to feel like myself again. Not the old David, the trusting, naive David who had believed in fairy tales. But a new David, a David who had been through the fire and come out the other side, scarred but not broken. I introduced Sarah to Rachel over a video call, and my sister's approval was immediate and unequivocal. "I like her," Rachel said bluntly, her voice crackling through the speaker. "She's got a good head on her shoulders, and she's not a scheming, backstabbing snake. That's a plus." I laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised me. It was the first time I had laughed like that in years. Rachel was right. Sarah was everything Alina wasn't. She was honest, loyal, and genuine. She didn't play games. She didn't hide behind a mask. She was exactly who she appeared to be, and that was the most refreshing thing in the world. We had been dating for about 6 months when I finally decided to tell her the truth. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun set over the city skyline. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that made you feel like the world was full of possibility. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah," I said, my voice quiet, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned to look at me, her expression curious but unafraid. "What is it?" she asked. I told her everything. I told her about Alina, about the 17 years of marriage, about the slow erosion of our relationship. I told her about Mark, about the boy I had raised, about the man he had become. And then I told her about the night I came home early, about the candle on the coffee table, about the credit cards on the nightstand, about the betrayal that had shattered my world. I didn't spare her the details. I didn't try to make myself look like a saint. I told her about my anger, my bitterness, my descent into near alcoholism. I told her about the divorce, the court case, the loss of my savings, the loss of my home. I told her about the months of numbness, the years of isolation, the decision to move across the country and start over. And I told her about the fear that had consumed me, the fear of trusting again, the fear of being hurt again. When I finished, I couldn't look at her. I stared out at the sunset, waiting for her to react. I expected her to pull away, to make an excuse and leave, to tell me that I was too damaged, too broken, too much of a mess for her to handle. I had prepared myself for that outcome. I had rehearsed it in my head 100 times, but instead she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady against my cold, trembling skin. "David," she said softly, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry you had to carry that alone." I looked at her, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "You're not disgusted?" I asked. "You're not afraid?" She shook her head, a small, sad smile on her face. "I'm not disgusted," she said. "I'm not afraid. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that you trusted me enough to tell me. I'm grateful that you're still here, that you didn't let them destroy you. And I'm grateful that you're willing to try again." I felt the tears spill over, hot and heavy, sliding down my cheeks. I had cried so much over the past 2 years, but these tears were different. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love I thought I would never feel again. I pulled her into my arms and held her tight, burying my face in her hair. "I love you," I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. She pulled back, her eyes bright with her own tears. "I love you too, David," she said. "I love you too." It was the first time I had said those words since Alina. It was the first time I had meant them. Our relationship deepened after that. The confession had broken down the last of my walls, and I let her in completely. We moved in together a few months later into a new apartment that felt like ours, not just mine. It was a fresh start, a clean slate, a chance to build something new on the ashes of my old life. I was happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy, the kind of happiness I had thought was lost to me forever. I still had moments of doubt, moments when the old wounds would ache and the fear would creep back in. But Sarah was always there, a steady hand on my shoulder, a gentle reminder that I was safe, that I was loved, that I was worthy of happiness. And then, 2 years after I had moved to the new city, I got a letter. It was addressed to my old apartment, forwarded to my new address by the postal service. The envelope was plain, no return address, just my name scrawled in an unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it with a sense of dread, my gut telling me that whatever was inside was not going to be good. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it and read the words, my heart sinking with every sentence. It was from Mark. "Dad," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't blame you. I've done terrible things, things I can never take back. I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand, but I'm writing to you because I need you to know the truth. The whole truth. Alina lied to you. She lied to me. She's been lying to everyone her entire life. She told me she was unhappy with you. She told me you were cold and distant and that you didn't love her. She told me that she had always felt a special connection with me, that I was the only person who truly understood her. She manipulated me, Dad. She used me. I was 18 years old, confused and lonely, and she preyed on that. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know it was wrong until it was too late. And by the time I realized what was happening, I was in too deep. I was ashamed. I was scared. I didn't know how to get out. I read the words, my hands shaking, my vision blurring. I read them again and again, trying to process what I was seeing. Mark was painting a picture of Alina as a predator, a master manipulator who had seduced her own son and destroyed our family. It was a narrative that was both shocking and, in a twisted way, deeply familiar. I had seen that side of Alina, the side that could twist reality to suit her needs, the side that could justify any action, no matter how heinous. But I had never imagined she would go this far. I had never imagined she would use our son as a weapon. The letter continued. "She told me that you had cheated on her first," Mark wrote. "She said you had been having affairs for years, that you had never loved her, that you were just using her for a comfortable life. I believed her. I believed everything she said. I was young and stupid, and I wanted so badly to believe that I wasn't the bad guy. But I was the bad guy, Dad. I was the one who slept with your wife. I was the one who helped her plan to steal your money and leave you with nothing. I was the one who destroyed our family, and I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I put the letter down, my mind reeling. I didn't know what to believe. Mark was a liar, a betrayer, but so was Alina. They had both proven that they were capable of terrible things. Was it possible that Mark was telling the truth? Was it possible that he had been a pawn in Alina's twisted game, just as I had been? I thought about the night I had caught them, about the look on Mark's face. It had been a look of shame, of fear, of guilt, but it had also been a look of confusion. He had looked like a lost child, not a calculating adult. I had been so consumed by my own rage that I hadn't seen it. I had only seen the betrayal. I hadn't seen the manipulation. I called Rachel, my voice trembling as I read her the letter. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she let out a long, slow breath. "Jesus Christ," she said, "that woman is a monster." "I don't know what to believe," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know if he's telling the truth or if he's just trying to manipulate me like she did." "Maybe both," Rachel said. "Maybe he's telling the truth about what she did, but he's also trying to absolve himself of his own guilt. It doesn't change what he did, Dave. It doesn't change the fact that he slept with your wife and helped her steal from you, but it might explain why it happened. It might help you make sense of it." I sat there in the silence, the letter clutched in my hand, and I realized that Rachel was right. It didn't change anything, but it did give me a new perspective, a new understanding of the mess that had been my life. I didn't respond to Mark's letter. I didn't know how. I still had so much anger, so much pain, so much confusion. But I also felt a sliver of something else. Pity, not for myself, but for him. He had been a child, barely an adult, and he had been manipulated by someone he trusted. That didn't excuse what he had done, but it made me understand it a little better. It made me realize that we were both victims of Alina's selfishness. He had lost his father, his family, his sense of self. He had been used and discarded just like I had been. It was a sad, tragic realization, and it opened a door in my heart that I had kept firmly closed for years. I didn't forgive him. I wasn't ready for that. But I started to feel something other than rage. I started to feel compassion, and that was a start. A few weeks later, I received another letter. This one was from Alina. It was a rambling, desperate plea for forgiveness, filled with lies and justifications and the same old manipulations. She said she missed me. She said she had made a terrible mistake. She said she had been diagnosed with depression and was seeking treatment. She said she wanted to come home. She said she loved me. I read the letter and I felt nothing but disgust. She was still playing the victim, still refusing to take responsibility for her actions, still trying to manipulate me into giving her another chance. I crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. I didn't respond. I didn't even block her number this time. I just ignored her. She was a ghost, a relic of a past I had worked so hard to leave behind. She didn't deserve my attention, my anger, or my forgiveness. She deserved nothing. I went to Sarah that night and told her about the letters. I told her about Mark's confession, about Alina's desperate plea. I told her about the conflicting emotions I was feeling, the anger, the confusion, the pity. She listened, her hand in mine, her eyes full of love. And when I finished, she said, "You don't have to make a decision right now. You don't have to forgive them or forget what they did. You just have to keep living your life. You have to keep moving forward. That's the only way to heal." I nodded, tears in my eyes. She was right. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the pain. But I could choose to let go of the bitterness. I could choose to focus on the future. I could choose to be happy. And so I did. I let go of the anger. I let go of the need for revenge. I let go of the hope that I would ever get an apology or an explanation that would make sense of the chaos. I just let go. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a quick process. It took months of therapy, months of talking to Sarah, months of forcing myself to confront the pain instead of running from it. But eventually, I found a kind of peace. It was a fragile peace, a peace that could be shattered by a stray thought or a random memory. But it was there and it was real. I never contacted Mark again. I never talked to Alina again. I didn't know if Mark had been telling the truth. I didn't know if Alina had truly manipulated him or if he had been a willing participant. I didn't know if Alina's depression was real or just another act. I didn't know anything and I had stopped caring. They were no longer a part of my life. They were no longer a part of my story. My story was about me, about Sarah, about the future we were building together. It was about the new job, the new city, the new life I had created from the ashes of the old one. A year later, I married Sarah. It was a small ceremony, just a few friends and family on a beautiful beach on the West Coast. Rachel was my best woman, and she gave a toast that made everyone cry and laugh. "David has been through hell," she said, raising her glass. "But he came out the other side, and he found someone who makes him happy, and that's all any of us can ask for." I looked at Sarah, her face radiant in the golden light of the setting sun, and I felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it took my breath away. I had lost everything. I had been broken, shattered, left for dead. But I had survived. I had rebuilt, and I had found love again. It wasn't the same love I had felt for Alina. It was something stronger, something deeper, something forged in the fires of pain and loss. It was a love that knew what it was like to lose, and it was determined to never let go. I still think about that night sometimes. The smell of the vanilla candle. The look on Mark's face. The sound of Alina's sobs. It's a scar, a permanent mark on my soul. But it's a scar that has healed, a wound that has closed. It's a reminder of what I survived, of the person I used to be, of the person I have become. I don't hate Alina anymore. I don't hate Mark. I don't hate anyone. I've spent too much of my life being angry and I'm tired. I'm ready to be happy. I'm ready to move on. Sarah and I are expecting a child now, a boy. We've decided to name him Daniel after my grandfather. I'm going to be a father again, and this time I'm going to do it right. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be loving. I'm going to be the father that Mark never got to have. I know I can't change the past. I can't undo the mistakes I made or the mistakes that were made against me. But I can shape the future. I can create a new story, a new legacy, a new family. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to live my life, not in the shadow of my past, but in the light of my future. I'm going to be the man that Sarah deserves, the father that Daniel needs, the brother that Rachel can be proud of. I'm going to be the man I always wanted to be. And as I sit here, writing this, I realize that the story isn't really about betrayal. It's not about cheating or financial ruin or the destruction of a family. It's about survival. It's about resilience. It's about the human capacity to endure unimaginable pain and still find the strength to love again. It's about the fact that no matter how dark it gets, the sun will always rise again. It's about the fact that we are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we do with the moments that follow. I have been broken, but I am not broken. I have been hurt, but I am not bitter. I have been betrayed, but I am not a victim. I am a survivor. And I am finally, truly free.
তুই সুযোগ পায়া দিলি দুঃখ, সুযোগ পায়া দিলি দুঃখ আমার সরল দিলে, দেখবো আমি তোর কপালে কোন ব্যারিস্টার মিলে, ওরে দেখবো আমি তোর কপালে কোন ব্যারিস্টার মিলে। সুযোগ পায়া দিলি দুঃখ, সুযোগ পায়া দিলি দুঃখ আমার সরল দিলে, দেখবো আমি তোর কপালে কোন ব্যারিস্টার মিলে, ওরে দেখবো আমি তোর কপালে কোন ব্যারিস্টার মিলে। সাগরের ঢেউ দেখিয়া নাই মন সাগরে, নানা মিলে সাধন ভজন সকলি যাই বিফলে গো, সকলি যাই বিফলে। ওরে রূপ সাগরের ঢেউ দেখিয়া নাই মন সাগরে, নানা মিলে সাধন ভজন সকলি যাই বিফলে গো, সকলি যাই বিফলে। আহা সাগরের দুই মোহনা, একটি আশায় একটি যাওয়া, সাধক যারা নাই মোতারা, সাধক যাহারা নাই মোতারা, সাধক যারা নাই মোতারা, সাধক সারা যায় ডুবে রূপসাগর।